CM Punk. The UFC signs Phil CM Punk Brooks in late 2014 and immediately tries to convince the world that a 37-year-old ex-pro wrestler with no amateur fights is a legitimate MMA prospect. It's like hiring a magician to perform brain surgery. Technically entertaining, but probably not safe. By UFC 203, Punk walks into Cleveland with the confidence of a man who's watched a lot of YouTube tutorials. Mickey Gall takes one look, double legs him into orbit, and finishes with a rear naked choke faster than most people can microwave popcorn. Punk lands 0 significant strikes, not even a jab for dignity. 2 years later at UFC 225, he faces journalist Mike Jackson, who fights him like he's late for brunch. Jackson wins every round while Dana White visibly ages 10 years at cageside. The judges score at 30-26, but the real score is MMA 2, Pro Wrestling 0. Punk's effort earns respect, but his technique earns memes. In the end, he proves one undeniable truth. Heart can't replace head movement, and delusion can't defend a takedown. Thomas Ramirez. At UFC 8 in 1996, Thomas Ramirez steps into the octagon with a record so ridiculous it deserves its own genre. Acclaimed 200-0, undefeated, untouchable, unstoppable, according to absolutely nobody with documentation. Ramirez, a 41-year-old 410-pound taxi driver from Puerto Rico, enters wearing the confidence of a man who's won at least 200 imaginary fights. His mysterious fighting style, Puachan, sounds more like a street food stall than a martial art. Across from him stands Don Fry, a mustached, mulleted monster with actual wrestling and boxing credentials. Basically, the human embodiment of an uppercut. The fight lasts 8 seconds, which is about the same amount of time it takes to realize the 200-0 was a typo for 0-200. Fry lands one clean punch, Ramirez face plants, and the legend evaporates faster than a taxicab meter on pause. There's no comeback tour, no rematch, and no evidence Ramirez ever existed outside this 8-second myth. The UFC quietly moves on, pretending this whole thing was a fever dream. To this day, Ramirez remains the perfect symbol of early UFC chaos. Proof that in 1996, you didn't need skills or tape. You just needed a story dumb enough for someone to believe. James Toney. At UFC 118 in Boston, August 2010, James Lights Out Toney walks in with 83 boxing wins, 3 world titles, and enough trash talk to fill an audiobook. He calls MMA easy money, promising to prove that boxing is all you really need, which is like bringing a spoon to a gunfight and calling it confidence. Across from him is Randy Couture, 47 years old, looking like a kindly uncle, who's about to teach Toney what double leg means in a very personal way. 10 seconds in, Couture changes levels, takes him down, and Toney discovers the ground feels like quicksand with bad intentions. What follows isn't a fight. It's a tutorial on what happens when boxing defense meets grappling reality. Toney flails, wiggles, and attempts the world's slowest hip escape before Couture politely arm triangles him into humility at 3:19 of round 1. The entire boxing vs. MMA debate ends right there. No judges needed, no rematch required. Toney never fights MMA again, presumably because he's still trying to figure out how half guard works. The moment becomes legend. The day Lights Out found out what tapped out really meant. Joe Sun. At UFC 4 in 1994, Joe Sun strolls into the octagon wearing a cross around his neck, a smile on his face, and absolutely 0 self-awareness. He proudly claims to represent Joe Sun Do, a martial art he literally made up, which should have been the first red flag. Across from him stands Keith Hackney, a man built like a refrigerator who looks thrilled to test drive the no-rules era. Moments after the fight starts, Hackney slams Sun to the mat and unleashes a barrage of legal groin punches so vicious they could qualify as a hate crime. Sun's legs spasm, his soul leaves the building, and his corner probably starts Googling testicle repair surgery. The entire fight lasts just over 2 minutes. But by then, Sun has tapped to the most infamous low blows in UFC history, a record no one wants to break. The clip becomes legend. The phrase "tap to nut shots" enters MMA folklore, and fans learn the hard way that early UFC rules were basically a social experiment. Years later, Son's name becomes even darker after his horrific real-world crimes, turning his groin tap loss into the least embarrassing part of his legacy. Some fights age like fine wine. This one ages like room temperature milk left in a gym bag. Mike Jackson. Mike Jackson's UFC career feels like a social experiment gone wrong. First, the UFC feeds him to Mickey Gall in 2016 just to set up CM Punk's debut, and Jackson gets choked out in 45 seconds like a test dummy that flunked its crash simulation. 2 years later at UFC 225, he finally gets his big moment, the real fight with CM Punk. Jackson proceeds to out-jab, out-slip, and out-stare Punk for 3 rounds while smirking at the crowd like he's shadowboxing in a mirror. The problem? He fights like he's sparring at half speed, throwing jazz hands instead of haymakers. The judges give him a 30-26, but the fans boo like he just unplugged their Wi-Fi. Dana White calls the performance a joke, and Jackson's roster spot vanishes faster than a heavyweight's gas tank. Years later, he returns and somehow wins by DQ because his opponent can't stop eye-gouging him, proving even physics doesn't want him in the cage. In the end, Mike Jackson becomes the rare fighter who won a UFC fight and still made absolutely everyone mad. He's not the worst because he lost. He's the worst because he made victory feel like defeat. Andy Anderson. UFC 5 in 1995 delivers what sounds like a fever dream. Andy Anderson, a self-proclaimed 86-0 knockout artist, who also happens to own a Texas establishment called Totally Nude Steakhouse. Because nothing says elite athlete like running a strip club that serves ribeye, the UFC, desperate for characters, bills him as a mysterious knockout king. What they get is a 2-minute physics lesson from 6'7" John Hess, a man who fights like a grizzly bear that just discovered caffeine. Anderson eats knees, flails wildly, and gets stopped so fast his fake record doesn't even have time to lie. The only thing that lands clean is his business plug, because everyone now knows where to get topless T-bones in Amarillo. Afterward, Anderson vanishes into obscurity, and some later legal trouble, as fans realize his undefeated streak probably came from bar fights and bad Yelp reviews. His UFC career lasts less time than it takes to order a steak medium rare. In hindsight, the Totally Nude Steakhouse wasn't just his job, it was his whole fight strategy. Overexposed, undercooked, and gone in minutes. Sean Gannon. It's 2004 and the early internet is losing its mind over a grainy backyard video of Boston cop Sean Gannon trading bare-knuckle bombs with Kimbo Slice in a fight that looks like it was filmed on a flip phone during an earthquake. Gannon wins that slugfest and becomes the first man to hand Kimbo a loss, earning viral fame before viral was even a term. The UFC notices the buzz and signs him in 2005, hoping the street fight legend might bring clicks and chaos into the cage. Instead, they throw him straight to Brandon Lee Hinkle, a Division I wrestler who treats Gannon's debut like a wrestling seminar. Hinkle takes him down, controls him, and finishes with ground and pound at 4:14 of round 1. The myth of the Kimbo Slayer ends with a reminder that wrestling mats aren't sidewalks. Gannon shows heart, but against a real grappler, heart can't stop a takedown. The street fight hero story officially meets the unified rules, and the result is less backyard brawl, more welcome to reality 101. Fred Edish. UFC 2 in 1994 delivers one of the most uncomfortable reality checks in martial arts history. Fred Edish, a traditional karate practitioner, steps in against Johnny Rhodes, a boxer-kickboxer who looks like he's late for a bar fight. One clean right hand swells Edish's eye, and with knees on the ground still legal, the match turns ugly fast. Rhodes finishes with a choke, and the image of Edish turtling under fire becomes an early internet meme, before memes even existed. For years, his name becomes shorthand for karate doesn't work, which is rough considering he never claimed it would. But decades later, at 53 years old, Edish returns to an amateur fight in 2009, submits his opponent, and flips the script completely. The man once mocked as a cautionary tale becomes a quiet legend of perseverance. No trash talk, no excuses, just redemption earned the hard way. It's poetic justice in 4-ounce gloves, and a reminder that sometimes the most important win comes 15 years late. Ryan Parker. UFC 7 in 1995 delivers one of the great cautionary tales of early mixed martial arts. Ryan Parker, a man who swore he could end fights with pressure points, mystical breathing, and ancient secrets that apparently skipped wrestling practice. His credentials sounded impressive on paper: third-degree black belt, self-proclaimed master of chi control, and the kind of confidence only found in strip mall dojos. He claimed his breathing techniques made him immune to chokes, which is a bold statement in a sport where people are literally paid to choke you. Across the cage, Remco Pardoel, a legitimate judo black belt from the Netherlands, looks less like a mystic and more like a man who just clocked in for a physics experiment. 10 seconds in, the experiment begins. Pardoel clinches, trips him like he's folding laundry, and mounts immediately. From there, it's a masterclass in what gravity and positional control think of invisible energy. Parker's breathing technique works beautifully for about 3 minutes, until Pardoel wraps his arm around the neck and ends the demonstration with a choke. The man who claimed to be choke-proof suddenly looks like he's trying to inhale the mat. The crowd sees the difference between ancient secrets and Monday wrestling drills. Even the commentators can't help but sound confused, like they just watched a live infomercial fail in real time. The tap echoes louder than any punch that night, marking another myth erased by reality. The UFC's early years were full of bold theories, but Parker's might be the funniest. The belief that deep breaths could stop jiu-jitsu. Spoiler, they can't. Jason Thacker. The year is 2005, and The Ultimate Fighter is about to rescue the UFC from financial extinction. Part sport, part reality TV chaos. Enter Jason Strange Brew Thacker, a polite Canadian with the heart of a fighter and the training record of a weekend hobbyist. Thacker walks into the house full of killers like a substitute teacher in a biker bar. His first assignment? Chris Lieben, a red-haired wrecking ball who drinks, screams, and punches drywall for cardio. The result lasts about 90 seconds. Lieben storms forward with hooks, Thacker backpedals into the cage, and the TKO arrives faster than the cameraman can adjust focus. But what lingers isn't the fight, it's the aftermath. The house pranks, the bullying, and the harsh editing turn Thacker into the season's sacrificial lamb. It's reality TV at its purest. One man's nightmare becomes a highlight reel for someone else's redemption arc. Thacker never gets another UFC shot, but he earns a cult following for surviving the madhouse. And honestly, living with Laban might have been tougher than fighting him. His story becomes an early warning about the blurred line between competition and content. Development takes gyms and patience. Television wants instant drama and a few tears before commercial. In the end, Thacker's role was small but crucial. The UFC needed someone to remind the world that not everyone in that house was ready for prime time. Art Jimerson. UFC 1 in 1993 gives us the sport's first fashion statement and first cautionary tale. Art Jimerson, a legitimate pro boxer with a solid record, walks into Denver's no-rules tournament wearing a single boxing glove, just one. The logic apparently was to punch with one hand and defend submissions with the other, a strategy that lives forever in the "What Were You Thinking?" Hall of Fame. Royce Gracie takes him down instantly, passes guard like he's clearing TSA, and mounts him without a scratch. Jimerson taps before a strike lands, more out of existential dread than damage. The glove itself becomes famous, enshrined in MMA memes as the most useless piece of equipment ever worn in combat. To be fair, Jimerson didn't know what a jiu-jitsu was, and neither did anyone else watching in 1993. But his decision to armor only half his body aged about as well as dial-up internet. You can't jab your way out of a chokehold, no matter how nice the Everlast logo looks. Jimerson never fought MMA again, though he forever owns the distinction of inventing half-contact fighting. His name is a reminder that preparation beats confidence, and that in the octagon, wardrobe choices can haunt you longer than losses. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Thanks for watching.